Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope you're doing good. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm going to end with the chapter of this American civilization concerning the colonial period until the declaration and the birth of a new nation. Of course, Declaration of Independence and the birth of the new nation. Um, Today, we are going to start with the Boston Tea Party, which is concerned with East India Company. This East India Company used to sell the British tea, and it had a quite important crisis, so it imposed taxes on the Americans because England gave it the authorization, the permission to do so. So they went to America, they went to Boston, and the Americans did not want to pay the tax, and the concept of no taxation without representation. So they wanted to impose this tax, and the Americans did not want to pay it, and they did not want to pay that tea at all. So patriots, led by Samuel Adams, on December 16th, 1773, they boarded three British ships, were anchoring on the American port. So what did they do? They threw the English tea in the ocean. So it was a boycott of the selling of this British tea. So since they threw the English tea in the ocean, they did not want to pay it. And these people, these patriots who were led by Samuel Adams, they were disguised in Native Americans in order not to be recognized by the royal soldiers. And this fact, this act, it created a crisis between Britain and between the British and the colonists, or so-called Americans. Then the British responded by passing laws which are called by the Americans the Coercive Acts. We have five Coercive Acts. So since the Americans did not want to pay the tea um, which was thrown in the water, Britain imposed some acts, or they responded by passing laws, which were called the Coercive Acts. So the first one is called the Boston Port Bill. It means to surround Boston's harbor and prevent their ships from sailing. It was a disaster because the economy of Boston depended on the sea. So you have a coastal town, and all the economy, the major economy of this town depended on the sea because Boston is situated in the north. It is cold there, there is no agriculture, so the people who lived in that area, they developed a shipbuilding industry, and they used these ships in order to exploit the sea in general, to fish, and also to initiate or to trade with other continents. So since Britain closed the port, it was a disaster for the Bostonians, or the people who lived in Boston. The second coercive act is called the appointment of councillors by the king. Which means it's the king who appoints people who would be or who would take his side. It means the king of England would appoint people who would work in the government in the colonists, and they would work, or they would take the side of the king. So they won't care about the life of the colonists. The third one is the prohibition of public meeting, which means to prevent the colonists from taking decisions against the British authority and act collectively. Because how did people grow such a feeling of patriotism, or the will, or the praise of freedom? Because they used to meet in public and to discuss many topics, which creates diversity, and diversity of ideas is innovation, and they get a lot of things. So they want freedom. So the King of England, or those who passed the laws, they decided to stop those public meetings um, in order to prevent them from acting collectively. Each one would think for their own good. The fourth one is called Quartering Act, and basically it is the royal soldiers should be hosted in the homes of the colonists, and also should be taken in charge, which means food, lodging, etc. So Britain will send soldiers, royal soldiers, to the colonists in order to, let's say, enforce these acts, and they forced the Americans to take these soldiers in charge, which means they would give them food, a roof to crash in, and also they give them places where to stay and all sort of things. And then the fifth and the last, which is called the Quebec Act. It consists of giving the right to the French inhabitants to extend their province and enjoy religious freedom. And of course, the colonists opposed because they considered it as revenge from the British government. And it's like not long ago, there was a war between the French and the English because of territories, and then the British are giving territories to the French, so it was not logical to the colonists to see that, so they opposed. They did not like it, and they refused, and also they resisted. So these five acts were called the Coercive Acts. And the colonists responded by, how did they respond to such acts? They responded by the First Continental Congress, which was set in September the 5th, 1774. Virginia. So this Continental Congress is like a meeting between all the colonies. I mean, each colony would send, for example, delegates, people that would represent the colony, and they would meet and discuss this problem of the Coercive Acts. So it is called the First Continental Congress, which was set in September the 5th, 1774. So what happened? Virginia representatives called for this Congress, and representing the 13 colonies. They had 55 members to take collective actions. It means to decide what to do together against these five coercive acts. So they met in Philadelphia, and some of these members, some of these people, they were loyalists. So I'll explain the difference between loyalist and a patriot. So a patriot is the one who loves the country, they want freedom, and the loyalists were like the people who wanted to have a good relationship with Britain because they still consider themselves as British people instead of Americans. So we had two categories of people in the meeting. So the Loyalists wanted to keep good relationships with England, while other colonies stood with Massachusetts, which means they wanted, they didn't like what these five coercive acts did to the North in general, because do not forget, these coercive acts were not on the 13 colonies, they were only on Massachusetts and Boston more precisely. So these colonies, why did they rally to aid or to help Massachusetts? Simply because they knew that in case Massachusetts gave up, it would be the turn of the other colonies, and each one by one they would give in. So some of them stood with Massachusetts, and they said they had a motto in the this First Continental Congress. They said that no obedience was due to the Coercive Acts, which means we will not obey, sorry, and because we cannot obey you if you're using force with us. So there was the colonists declared the rights or their rights and grievances to the British people. These colonists decided to speak about the situation in America, and they sent these grievances to the British people in order to aware them about the situation. But the king was not, let's say, he was a stillborn. He wanted to rule autocratically. It was King George III, as you all know. Instead of doing something which does not include force, he sent troops. He sent soldiers to America, and there was a general code or cade. He was sent to America in order to enforce these coercive acts. He wrote a letter to a friend for the king. He sent, um, he said that it was like a warning before he loses the colonies. So he wrote this letter to his friend telling him that if the king keeps doing what he's doing right now, he will eventually lose the 13 colonies. So at the arrival of the troops in America, they met with the American militia. What is a militia? Where it means to, for example, during the day you're a farmer, and whenever something bad happens to your country or to your colony, you will take weapons or arms and to defend your house. These are called militias. They are not troops. They were not formed. They were just citizens. They were farmers. They were, for example, priests or whatsoever. But when something bad happens, they take weapons in order to help defending their colony or their country. This is a militia. So the American militias met with the British troops in a place called Lexington. It was in 1775, and it was the first battle of the American Civil War. And there were victims on both sides, but we think that the British um, had more losses comparing to the Americans. It was like the triple of the losses of the Americans. And right after the battle, the word of the battle spread like in 20 days. 13 colonies knew about the battle, and they decided to have the Second Continental Congress in May the 10th, 1775. And they were favorable to war. Basically, all the colonies wanted the war. They wanted independence. Why? Because the American blood was spilt. And even the loyalists, because the loyalists before there was no war, so they wanted to keep good relationships. But now, since they have seen the real face of the British government and the British king, they decided to go for the War of Independence. So this was during the Second Continental Congress, and there was quite a person quite important during this revolution. His name is Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet which is exquisite, very beautiful. I advise you to read it. It is called The Common Sense. It pressed for separation, you know, the 13 colonies would be separated from the British government or the British country. He said in his pamphlet, by the way, how can a small island govern a continent? How can a small island, which means England, how can England govern a continent which is America? He was like roasting, he was like dissing the King of England, he was roasting England in general in order to praise patriotism. That's why, as a result of this pamphlet, patriotism grew stronger than loyalty. Then they adopted the Declaration of Independence in July the 4th, 1776, and they announced of the birth of a new nation. They set forth a philosophy of freedom for individual, and they have made one of the best institutions in the world, a democratic system which set forth life, freedom, and happiness. This is how the Declaration of Independence happened, the major factors that played a major role in order to initiate this declaration, and the war ended in 1782 when the British Parliament decided to stop the war, to stop fire. And of course, the French helped the Americans as well. The American soldiers were led by George Washington, the commander of the army. And then there was a new nation which was born, and they set a new philosophy of life, freedom, and happiness of the individual, and it was a democratic system as well. So this is it for the for the American civilization. This chapter, six parts. Then perhaps, if I have time, I'm sure that I'm going to carry on with the Civil War or the antebellum in general, from the year of 1812 or something, or 1789 or 82, 92 or 99, until the Civil War in 61, and maybe I'll carry on with the Reconstruction, the Progressive Era, and the Gilded Age. So if I've made things clear, that's more like it. And if you have any question, feel free to message me. I'm going to leave the link of the Facebook channel of this YouTube channel. You can message me there, or you can just message me in, I'll leave my personal email and you can use it as well. So I tell you, see you in the next video. Peace.